My name is Daniel Carter, and for as long as I can remember, fire has been a part of me. Not in a reckless, destructive way, but in a way that felt inevitable. Like it had always been pulling me toward it, whispering something I could never quite understand. I grew up in Harrison, Montana, a quiet town nestled against endless stretches of pine forests. Life there was simple, predictable. Summers were dry, winters were unforgiving, and the people, strong, resilient, fiercely independent, lived by an unspoken code. You take care of your own. My father was a firefighter, the kind of man you don't forget. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands rough from years of pulling people from burning buildings and cutting fire breaks through the wilderness. He wasn't just respected in town, he was admired. A man who never backed down, who walked straight into hell with nothing but a hose and a prayer. And I idolized him. As a boy, I would sit on the front steps of our house, watching him return from a call. His boots covered in ash, the smell of smoke clinging to his uniform, exhaustion in his eyes, but always that steady presence. I never saw fear in him, not once. I thought if I followed in his footsteps, I would feel that same unshakable purpose, that same quiet strength. But life is a way of complicating things. At 21, I joined the Montana Department of Fire Protection. It wasn't just a career, it became my life. For over 2 decades, I lived and breathed firefighting. Every call, every blaze, every desperate moment spent pulling people from the brink, it all mattered. It all meant something, or at least it used to. Lately, things had started to change in ways I didn't want to admit. The fires were getting worse, bigger, hotter, more unpredictable. They weren't just seasonal anymore. They came all year round, roaring through entire towns as if they had a mind of their own. I kept telling myself it was just climate shifts, bad luck, poor land management. But deep down, I wasn't sure. And that uncertainty, it ate at me. Some nights, after another brutal shift, I would sit in my truck outside our house, gripping the steering wheel, unable to move. Inside, my wife, Emily, would be putting our daughter to bed, her laughter echoing softly through the windows. The warmth of home, just a few steps away, but I felt like a stranger in my own life. She noticed, "You're quiet these days," she said one evening, setting a plate of food in front of me. Her voice was careful, as if she already knew the answer and was afraid to hear it out loud. "I'm just tired," I lied. And she let it go, because that's what we did. We let things go. For years, I had always believed in God, not in a passive, distant way, but in the kind of faith that felt woven into the fabric of my life. It was easy to believe when I was young, when my father would bow his head at the dinner table, thanking the Lord for another safe return, when my mother whispered prayers over me before bed. It was easy when life followed the rules, when good men lived, and the wicked faced justice. But lately, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. For the past few years, something had shifted. The fires had changed. I had been a firefighter for more than 20 years, long enough to know how fire behaved, how it crawled, how it spread, how it could be beaten back with enough manpower and strategy. But recently, it felt like the flames had a mind of their own. They weren't just burning, they were devouring. And we were always one step behind. The 2025 wildfires were unlike anything I had ever seen. They tore through entire communities in hours, swallowing homes and businesses, leaving nothing but charred skeletons of what once was. We used to talk about fire season, a time of year we prepared for, braced against. But now, fire season never ended. The land never had time to heal before the next blaze arrived, bigger, hotter, more merciless than the last. I told myself it was just a string of bad years, bad luck. Maybe climate change, maybe something else. But deep down, a question had begun to settle in my bones. A question I didn't want to ask. Why? Why were the fires getting worse? And why did they feel personal? I never spoke these thoughts out loud. Not to my crew, not to my wife. But the doubt festered in me, gnawing at the edges of my conviction. I still prayed, still bowed my head in those desperate moments before charging into a blaze. But my faith felt thin, stretched like a rope fraying under too much weight. One night, after a 14-hour shift battling an out-of-control fire near Cedar Springs, I sat on the edge of our bed, head in my hands. Emily walked in, already sensing the storm brewing inside me. She stood there for a moment before finally sitting beside me. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft, careful. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. You're not yourself." I swallowed hard, trying to force the words out. "I don't know what's happening anymore," I admitted. "The fires, they're different now. I feel like we're losing. Like no matter what we do, it's not enough." Emily reached for my hand. "You've been doing this job a long time. Maybe you just need a break." "Maybe." "It's not that," I interrupted, shaking my head. "It's more than that. I can't explain it, but something's coming. I can feel it." She studied my face for a long moment, then squeezed my hand. "Then pray," she whispered. "Ask God for clarity." I nodded, but the truth was I already had, and I was terrified of the answer. Top of form, bottom of form. January 12th, 2025 started like any other day. I woke up before the sun, the scent of coffee drifting through the house as Emily moved around the kitchen. She always woke up with me, even though she didn't have to. I never asked her to, but she did it anyway. Maybe it was her way of making sure I walked out the door knowing I had someone to come home to. I sat at the table, staring at the steaming mug in front of me, my mind already elsewhere. Another fire, another town at risk. It had become routine, so much so that it almost didn't feel real anymore. Emily sat down across from me, studying me the way she always did when she knew something was weighing on me. "Big one?" she asked. I nodded. "They always are now." She reached for my hand, running her thumb over my knuckles. "Be careful," she said softly. I gave her a tired smile. "Always." But the truth was, I didn't know if being careful was enough anymore. By 7 a.m., I was in the truck with my team, heading toward the Cedar Springs wildfire. The sky was thick with smoke, turning the sun into a dull, blood-orange orb. We had been fighting fires non-stop for weeks now, barely rotating out long enough to sleep before jumping back in. The radio crackled to life. "All units, we have unaccounted civilians in the evacuation zone. Some elderly, some refusing to leave. We need teams to move in and get them out before the fire shifts." I felt my jaw tighten. How many times have we done this before? "Kane, you and Taylor take the north side. Check every house," came the order. I grabbed my gear, stepping out of the truck. The air was thick, hot, metallic, suffocating. Even after 20 years, I still wasn't used to that first breath of fire-choked air, the way it clawed at your lungs, leaving the taste of ash on your tongue. Taylor and I moved fast, knocking on doors, yelling through the smoke. Most houses were already empty. The residents had evacuated long before we arrived. But at the last house on the block, we found an elderly woman sitting in her living room, clutching a photo album to her chest. "I can't leave," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is all I have left." I knelt beside her, my voice as steady as I could make it. "We have to go, ma'am. It's not safe here." Her grip on the album tightened, her body trembling. For a moment, I thought she would refuse. Then, with a shaky breath, she nodded. I lifted her into my arms, carrying her outside as the wind shifted again. The trees swayed, the flames roaring closer. Something inside me twisted. This fire wasn't normal, and Deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The moment we got the old woman safely into the evacuation truck, I turned back toward the neighborhood. The air was hotter now, thick like steam rising from the pavement on a scorching summer day. But this wasn't summer, and this wasn't normal heat. I could feel it pressing against my skin, seeping into my bones like something alive, something relentless. The wind had shifted again. A bad sign. I grabbed my radio. "Command, this is Carter. The winds are picking up. We need to wrap this up fast." A few seconds of static, then a crackled reply. "Copy that, Carter. Be advised, the fire's moving faster than expected. Stay alert." I clenched my jaw. Faster than expected? That was an understatement. It wasn't just moving, it was chasing. I could feel it. Taylor and I sprinted to check the last houses on the street. Most were empty, their occupants long gone, but at the very last home, we found them, a father and his 2 kids, maybe 5 and 7 years old, scrambling to pack up what little they could carry. The kids were crying, their tiny hands clutching at their father's shirt as he frantically shoved clothes and photo frames into a duffel bag. "I can't leave everything behind," he gasped, his voice thick with panic. "Everything we own, our memories, our life, it's all here." I stepped forward, my own voice harder than I intended. "You don't have time to think about that. You need to leave. Now." He looked at me, eyes wide, torn between fear and denial. I didn't have time for this. I pointed at his kids. "They need you alive. Stuff can be replaced. They can't." That got him. His face twisted with something between grief and acceptance, but finally he nodded. We grabbed what little they had managed to pack and got them into the truck. Just as I slammed the door shut, the sky behind us exploded in orange. The fire had crested the hill, and it was coming fast. The flames roared like a freight train barreling toward us, swallowing trees in seconds, the heat rolling down the street like a living, breathing thing. My heart slammed against my ribs. "We need to move," I shouted to Taylor. But before we could run, the wind shifted again, hard, fast, violent. It was like something had yanked the air from my lungs. 1 second, we were standing in an open path toward the main road. The next, we were completely cut off. The fire had surrounded us. My radio crackled to life, but the signal was weak, distorted. "Carter, what's your status?" I pressed the button, coughing as smoke burned my throat. "We're trapped." Static. "Then, find another way out." "Now!" I spun in circles, searching for an escape route, but the walls of flame were closing in from every direction. My vision blurred from heat, from smoke, from the sickening realization that we might not get out. Taylor grabbed my arm. "The dirt path behind the houses, if we can make it through the brush, it might lead us to the main road." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. We ran. Fast. My boots pounded against the cracked dirt, the fire roaring so close behind me, I could feel my skin blistering under my gear. Embers pelted us, burning holes through my jacket, the smoke so thick I could barely see Taylor running beside me. Then, a deafening crack. A tree split and collapsed right in front of us, flames swallowing the path in an instant. I skidded to a stop, my breath coming in sharp, panic gasps. We were out of options. This is how it ends. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I had thrown myself into the flames without fear, believing I had some kind of unspoken protection, a faith that God had always been there, pulling me through the impossible. But now, all I felt was silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming. "God, I need you." The fire roared louder, and in the next second, everything went dark. The last thing I remembered was fire everywhere, roaring, hungry, unstoppable. The heat had swallowed everything, pressing against my body like a force I couldn't fight. There was no sky, no ground, just an endless, suffocating inferno. And then nothing. No pain, no sound, no weight, just silence. I opened my eyes, or at least I think I did. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The world around me was nothing like I had ever seen before. There was light, but not from fire. Not the violent, searing glow of flames consuming everything in their path. This light was soft, radiant, all-encompassing, yet I couldn't tell where it was coming from. And the stillness, it was almost unsettling. I had spent my entire life in chaos. The roar of flames, the blare of sirens, the desperate cries of people trapped and afraid. But here, there was nothing but peace. I looked down, expecting to see my hands, my boots, my body covered in soot and ash. But I wasn't there. At least, not in the way I had always understood myself to be. I should have panicked. I should have felt the crushing weight of fear, the desperate need to escape, to run. But instead, there was a strange, profound clarity, like I had been carrying something heavy my entire life without realizing it, and now it was gone. The exhaustion, the doubt, the endless what-ifs and unanswered prayers. They had all vanished. I took a step, or at least I thought I did, but there was no ground beneath me, no sense of gravity pulling me in any direction. I simply existed, weightless, unburdened. For a fleeting moment, a thought surfaced in my mind. Am I dead? The idea should have terrified me, but it didn't. If this was death, it wasn't something to fear. It was beautiful. And then, just as I was beginning to take it all in, something changed. The light around me shifted, pulsing like a heartbeat. A warmth deeper than anything I had ever known wrapped around me, not just outside, but inside, as if it were filling me up from the core of my being. And then I felt it, a presence, not just near me, but within me, surrounding me, knowing me. It wasn't like seeing a person walk into a room. It wasn't like hearing a voice calling my name. It was bigger than that, infinitely bigger. And yet it felt familiar, like I had known it all along, but had somehow forgotten. I turned, or at least I think I did, and that's when I saw him. At first, I could barely process it. He wasn't standing, not in the way I understood standing. He wasn't bound by space or time or gravity. But he was there, undeniably, overwhelmingly there. A light brighter than anything I had ever seen radiated from him, but it didn't hurt to look at. Instead, it drew me in, filled me with a warmth so pure, so complete, that I felt like I had spent my entire life searching for this moment without realizing it. And then he spoke. Daniel. My name. But it wasn't just my name. It was a truth, a calling, a knowing that shook me to my core. I collapsed, or at least I would have if I still had legs to collapse onto. Because deep down, in the parts of me that had always known the truth, I knew who he was. Jesus. The weight of it was too much to bear. I wasn't worthy. I wasn't holy. I wasn't the kind of man who deserved to stand before him. I had spent my life fighting against the fire, trying to save what I could, but I had never truly understood what I was fighting for. I had doubted. I had questioned. I had spent years trying to hold on to my faith, gritting my teeth and pushing forward even when I wasn't sure if anyone was listening. And now here he was, real, unmistakable. Do not be afraid, he said, his voice so much more than a voice. It wasn't sound. It wasn't something I heard with my ears. It was something I felt, like the sun warming your skin after a brutal winter, like the first breath after nearly drowning, like coming home. Tears, I don't even know if I had eyes to cry with, burned through me. I don't understand, I choked out. Why am I here? Why me? His eyes, filled with something I couldn't comprehend. Compassion, power, eternity itself held mine. "Because I love you," he said. The words hit me like a flood, and in that moment I understood this wasn't just about me. This was about everything. I stood, or floated, or simply existed in the presence of Jesus. And for the first time in my life, I had no words. I had faced down raging infernos, pulled people from the brink of death, and spent years running into places where no sane person would go. But here, in this moment, I was nothing more than a man laid bare, exposed by the sheer weight of the presence before me. The love radiating from him was unlike anything I had ever felt. Unfiltered, absolute, knowing. It wasn't the kind of love that had to be earned, proven, or justified. It simply was, and yet beneath that love, I felt something else rising in me. Fear. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I suddenly understood how small I was. How many times had I doubted? How many times had I questioned whether God was even listening? How many times had I thrown prayers into the darkness, only to feel like they never reached anyone? And now, he was here, seeing me, really seeing me. I dropped my gaze, unable to hold the weight of his eyes. "I don't deserve to be here," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. Jesus stepped closer, or maybe he was already there, and I felt warmth flood through me, as if the very air carried his presence. "You are here because I love you," he said again, gently but with unshakable certainty. I shook my head. "You have questions," he interrupted, not unkindly, not impatiently, but as if he had already seen every thought racing through my mind before I had even formed them. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Why like this?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because you were ready to see." I opened my mouth, ready to protest, but before I could speak, something shifted. The space around us, if it could even be called space, began to change. The radiant light dimmed, and suddenly, I was looking down. At the world. At the fire. I saw my body, still slumped in the cab of the fire truck, smoke curling around my helmet, flames licking at the metal. My partner was shouting for help, his hands gripping my jacket, trying to pull me out. The paramedics were rushing toward me, their faces drawn with urgency and fear. But that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. It was the fire itself, because I could see it now. I couldn't look away. The fire raged below, but I saw it differently now. Not just as flames, not just as heat and destruction. It was alive, not in the way we think of living things, but in something deeper, something dark and malevolent. And within it they moved, shadowed figures, writhing, twisting, almost melding with the fire itself. Their forms weren't solid, yet they weren't smoke either. They were something else, something with intent. I felt my chest tighten with a fear unlike anything I had ever known. "Jesus," I whispered, barely able to speak. "Well, what am I seeing?" His voice was calm, but heavy with sorrow. "The truth." I felt frozen, trapped between two worlds. The one I had always known, and this new, terrible reality unveiling itself before me. "The fires you fight are not just of this world," Jesus continued. "They are reflections of something greater, something unseen." I stared at the flames consuming the landscape, consuming my body below. This wasn't just a wildfire. It was something more. As I watched, I saw the dark shapes move with purpose, slithering through the fire, feeding off it, their forms stretching toward the buildings, toward the people trying to escape. I wanted to deny what I was seeing, wanted to tell myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the mind. But I knew this was real. The fire was more than just an accident. more than just nature taking its course. It was a manifestation of something evil, something ancient. I turned to Jesus, my voice breaking. But why? Why would you let this happen? He met my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw both sorrow and understanding. Because love does not force itself, he said. It calls, it waits, it invites. The destruction you see is the result of a world turning away. Each act of selfishness, each rejection of truth, each embrace of fear over faith, they feed the darkness. I looked back at the fire, at the figures within it. They moved with hunger, consuming everything in their path. This has been happening all along, hasn't it? I whispered. I just never saw it before. Jesus nodded. Many do not see. Many do not want to see. I clenched my fists, anger, confusion, helplessness twisting inside me. Then how do we stop it? How do we fight something like this? He placed a hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his presence stilled the storm inside me. You must tell them what you have seen, he said. His words sank into me like a weight, a calling, a command. I didn't know how. I didn't know if they would believe me. But I knew one thing for certain. I could never unsee the truth. I wanted to turn away. I wanted to shut my eyes, to force myself back into ignorance, back into the world where fire was just fire, where disaster was just bad luck. But I couldn't. I had seen too much. The darkness within the flames wasn't just moving. It was thriving, twisting through the fire like vines, stretching toward the sky, toward the people below who had no idea what was truly happening. And suddenly a new kind of pain tore through me. Not physical, but something deeper. Regret. How many times had I ignored the signs? The unease I had felt for years, the growing sense that something was wrong, that things were slipping out of control. I had dismissed it. I had doubted. I had told myself that things like this didn't happen, that faith was something to hold on to when it was convenient, when it didn't demand too much of me. I had fought fires my whole life, but I had never once asked what I was really fighting against. And now, standing here, forced to face the truth, I felt ashamed. I turned to Jesus, my voice breaking. I was blind. His eyes, filled with a sorrow deeper than I could comprehend, never left mine. Many are, he said softly. I swallowed hard, my chest tight. I thought I was doing good. I thought my work. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. But I was just reacting. I never saw the real battle. A silence stretched between us, heavy with everything I had failed to see, failed to do. And then, I whispered the question that had been burning in me since I had first seen the truth. Is it too late? Jesus took a step closer, his presence strong, unwavering. Not yet, he said, but the time is short. The weight of his words crushed me, sinking into my bones. I wanted to plead, to beg for more time. Not for me, but for the people still below, the ones who had no idea what was coming. I could feel it now, the urgency, the tipping point. We weren't just at the edge of disaster. We were already falling. Then what do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jesus looked at me with a love so deep it hurt. Tell them what you have seen. I closed my eyes, swallowing down the grief that threatened to break me. Would they believe me? Would they listen? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I had to try. My lungs gasped for air, my body convulsing as if I had been dragged from the depths of the ocean. A sharp, piercing pain tore through my chest, my ribs aching with the force of my return. Every nerve in my body screamed, as if fire itself had followed me back. My eyes shot open, and before I could even process where I was, the words burst from my lips, raw and undeniable. Jesus is God. The room around me blurred, figures moving in chaotic motion. Voices shouting, machines beeping, hands pressing down on my chest, checking my pulse. I was somewhere real now, somewhere physical, but the reality I had just left was more real than this could ever be. Easy, Carter. You're okay. You're back. Just breathe. A familiar voice called out, tight with urgency. I blinked hard, my vision coming into focus. The bright, sterile glow of overhead hospital lights stung my eyes, a sharp contrast to the ethereal light I had just been wrapped in. Then I saw them, faces hovering above me. Emily, my wife, tears streaming down her face, gripping my hand like she'd never let go. Daniel, oh my God, you scared me. Her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of emotion. I turned my head slowly, the weight of my own body foreign to me now. My limbs felt like they didn't belong, like they had been abandoned for too long and were now reluctant to work again. But I was here. I was back. And yet, how could I be? I had been somewhere else, somewhere that felt like the very fabric of existence itself. The paramedics, the nurses, they were all talking, checking monitors, speaking in rushed tones, but none of it mattered. None of it compared to what I had just experienced. I knew the truth now. I could feel it seared into my soul. Jesus wasn't just real. He wasn't just a man from history, a figure in a book, a symbol of faith. He was everything. I turned to Emily, my throat raw, my breath still uneven. You have to listen, I croaked. She wiped at her tears, nodding frantically. Okay, I'm listening. I swallowed hard, the weight of my words heavier than anything I had ever spoken in my life. I saw him. My voice was hoarse, broken, but filled with certainty. Emily's face went still, her breath catching. Saw who? I squeezed her hand, my grip weak but insistent. Jesus. The room seemed to freeze around me. The noise of the machines faded into the background, the whispers of doctors and nurses suddenly irrelevant. Emily's face paled. She stared at me like she wasn't sure if she should believe me or fear for my sanity. But she knew me. She knew I wasn't the kind of man to make things up. I had spent my whole life rooted in reality, battling flames, watching men die, facing the worst of this world. I had never been prone to visions or fantasies. This was real, and she could see it in my eyes. I looked down at my hands, flexing my fingers, still expecting them to feel weightless, to be part of that other place. But they weren't. I was fully here now, but the knowledge, the truth, was still burning inside me. Daniel, Emily whispered, searching my face. What happened to you? I exhaled shakily, every breath still feeling like a battle. I died, I said simply. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Her grip on my hand tightened. No, she choked out, shaking her head. No, you were out for a few minutes, but Emily, I interrupted, my voice steady now. I was gone. I saw my body. I saw the fire. And I saw. My voice faltered, emotions tightening my throat. I forced myself to say it. I saw what was inside the fire. And I saw him. Her breath hitched, her eyes wide with something between awe and fear. The doctor cleared his throat, stepping closer. Mr. Carter, you were unconscious for approximately 3 minutes. Your heart stopped. We had to resuscitate you. I barely heard him. 3 minutes? It had felt like a lifetime. I turned back to Emily, my voice filled with something raw, something unstoppable. I have to tell them, I said. I have to tell everyone. Emily just stared at me, as if she were seeing me for the first time. And maybe she was, because I wasn't the same man who had left for work that day. I never would be again. I left that hospital a different man. Before my experience, I had been a firefighter, a husband, a father. A man who believed in God, but lived as if he were somewhere far away, watching from a distance. But now, I had seen him. I had stood in his presence, and I could not stay silent. The truth burned inside me like a fire of its own. Not one that destroyed, but one that illuminated, pushing back the darkness I had ignored for too long. I started small, first with Emily. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, we would sit at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that always went cold before I could finish. She would listen, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, her eyes searching mine for some sign that this was all too much. But she never told me to stop. Instead, she asked questions. Why do you think he showed you this? How do we fight something we can't see? What if people don't believe you? That last question sat heavy between us, and I had no good answer. Not everyone did believe me. Some of my old friends, firefighters I had risked my life beside, laughed it off. You inhaled too much smoke, Carter. Near-death hallucination, buddy. I think you just need some rest. But then there were others. People who listened with tears in their eyes, nodding before I even finished speaking. People who had felt it too. This sense of urgency, of something shifting in the world, of darkness pressing closer, while so many went about their lives unaware. I was invited to speak at a small church in town, then a community center, then a gathering of first responders. Each time, I stood before them, my voice steady, my heart pounding. And I told them what I had seen, what I had learned, what I now knew without a doubt. The fires are more than just flames, I said, scanning the faces in front of me. They are a warning. They are a call. And we have to choose now who we belong to. Some wept. Some sat frozen in their seats. And some left, unwilling to hear more. But that wasn't my burden to carry. I had been given a message, and I would not stop sharing it. I never thought I would die that day, but I did. I left my body, left the burning wreckage, and found myself in a place unlike anything on earth, a place of unimaginable peace, light, and love. And there I saw him, Jesus. His presence was overwhelming, not because of fear, but because of the absolute love that radiated from him, a love deeper than anything I had ever known. He saw every part of me, every mistake, every doubt, and still he called me by name. In that moment, I understood something I had been blind to my whole life. We are in the middle of a battle we cannot see. The fires I fought weren't just flames. They were a warning, a reflection of the darkness that has spread in this world. But there is hope. Jesus told me I had a mission, to tell you, to wake you up, to help you see. I came back with a truth I can never unsee. God is real. The battle is real. And we must choose where we stand. So now, I ask you, if you were me, if you had seen what I saw, how would you live your life? Would you ignore it? Or would you turn to God before it's too late? If this message speaks to you, leave your prayer in the comments below, and I will personally pray for you. Like this video, subscribe, share this message, because the time to choose is now.